Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about The Terror from 1928. And this is part of my series called Lost Film File, where I talk about films that are lost and everything that we do actually know about them. Or at least were lost when I made this video. The Terror is actually the first sound horror film, and only the second sound film from Warner Brothers, the other being, of course, Lights of New York. And it was actually the first sound Warner Brothers film without interstitials or title cards going throughout it. And you'd think, because being the first sound horror film, that would make it sort of an important part of film history, that, people would keep it around or it would not have been lost, but that is unfortunately not true. The Terror is about a killer whose identity is unknown, who occupies an English country house that has been converted into an inn and frightens the guests with strange noises and mysterious organ music. After apparently two men are released from jail, have sworn revenge upon the Terror, who I guess is the killer, and then after a night of mayhem that includes murder, the identity of the Terror is revealed, or at least that's pretty much the consensus on what the plot we believe is. This is based on a play also called The Terror by Edgar Wallace, so we semi-know what this is about. This might have taken some liberties. A sequel was made in 1934, and then another version of this play was made into a film in 1937, and Edgar Wallace was kind of a bigger author at the time. He made a ton of stuff, a ton of plays, and was a bigger name at the time that they made this film. This movie doesn't really have the greatest reputation. In fact, it has a pretty horrible reputation, actually. The quote from a New York Times review actually says, "The universal opinion of London critics is that The Terror is so bad that it is almost suicidal," which is one hell of a takedown. It basically calls it boring and how it's slow and drags. And even Edgar Wallace in the Times write-up says, who wrote the film and wrote the play that it was based on, actually said, "Well, I have never thought that the talkies would be a serious rival to the stage," which is a pretty damning thing to say, especially about your own film. Although apparently I was wrong. It's actually written by Harvey Gates and Joseph Jackson. It seems like this wasn't the best liked at the time, and this is actually very early sound film. So early, in fact, there's a silent film version made at the same time, which is actually, according to most of what I read, 5 minutes longer than the sound version. And the silent version, because most theaters hadn't converted, this is early on in terms of sound being in movies, so they actually would make a silent version and a sound version, and the silent version supposedly was supposed to be far superior to the silent version, and people who were more fans of silent films and having sound come in would actually point to the different versions and the disparity in quality of the two, which is sort of interesting. We don't have either. We do actually have the Vitaphone sound on discs that is in the UCLA archive. To my understanding, it's never really been out. The UCLA archive seems to have a lot of rare stuff that they've never really let the public have, and I'm not exactly sure what the deal is with that. Sort of makes you doubt that they actually have it, since you can't actually prove that they do have it, but supposedly they do have the sound on disc. So the film itself doesn't exist, but the sound of this film, believe it or not, does. I get that this film sort of did pretty well, but as an early horror film, and the first time that a horror movie had ever had sound in it, I kind of wish this had survived. Now, this film has been considered lost since the 1970s. However, there's various documentation that the original negative was destroyed on December 27th, 1948, or at least that's what Warner's bookkeeping says. However, so potentially we believe there were other prints after the original negative was destroyed in 1948, because in February 1956, Jack Warner sold the rights to all of his pre-December 1949 films, which is pretty much 1949. I don't know why the December distinction, but whatever, including The Terror, to Associated Arts Productions. It is unknown if the film was copied and more prints were made of it, and it did not show on TV, which was kind of the idea, I assume, for Associated Artists Productions to have the rights to it, but the film was still kept in the television syndication package. So it was listed, but it was actually to be shown on TV, and the idea of it being shown on TV, but it was not actually shown on TV. And then in 1968, UA, which I assume says UA on a lot of, I'm not sure if that's United Artists or Associated Artists, whatever, but they donated 16mm prints of some Warner Brothers films from outside the US. So there's a potential that they made a 16mm print, or they had a print of this and they loaned it to someone or something like that. The idea that it could possibly be out there, but we don't actually know that any of that happened. Or if, Jack Warner sold it to them, they didn't actually have it and they just, kept the list of it like they had it or something like that. We don't know what happened to it after the sale. That's kind of just an avenue it seems like you could go down. And unfortunately, we don't know much about this film. We do know that the credits were spoken by a caped and masked Conrad Nagel, which is kind of interesting, I think. It does seem like kind of a cool idea of a movie, or the play at least, this idea of various different characters, a spiritualist and a detective who are staying at the inn, and these just released criminals, and this whole early killer in a cloak costume sort of thing. I noticed people keep listing it as a slasher film, and I don't think it is an actual early slasher film, but the idea of a person, in a costume terrorizing people kind of would show you, things that Halloween or Friday the 13th would do much later. Kind of is that basic idea, at least. I wish this film had survived, just so, you can read into it, and I understand how people can read into things, because you can't actually see it and read into it, because it's there and stuff. But it's an important part of horror cinema to see where you started with sound film, and we can do that with other motion pictures that are early sound films. But it's interesting to see how early sound, or this exact film and very early sound, would have done it, and even the disparity apparently in quality between the silent and sound versions. The sound version coming out on September 6th, 1928. The silent version came out on October 28th, 1928, which is just in time for Halloween. Neither version survives. I would like to compare them, because it seems like people, even though they said it was so bad it is almost suicidal, which isn't a very good review at all, and that it was fatiguing and boring. Even the guy who wrote the thing that this is based on didn't even think this whole idea of sound in movies actually even worked. So it doesn't seem like they had a really open mind at the time or anything like that. But this is a pretty important film, and shows you how much of film history is actually lost that we can't talk about. And this is a part of film history that I very much wish we could talk about, because we could talk about how, this kind of mass killer thing has always been a part of cinema. It was the part of sound film, and how it would later influence things almost 50 years later at the end of the 70s. Now, that was an early precursor to that. Or maybe it's not, because I haven't seen it. If you are able to find a copy of The Terror, or if you do, find someone who can take care of this unique and unseen piece of film history, I would love to be proven wrong one day, and this film to be found, so that we can see it and find out if it actually is almost suicidal, or if the silent version is actually that much better, and the disparity between the two, and how much of a disparity and how actually bad the sound version is. I'd like to thank Matt Berry for helping me do some research and talking this out with me. You should check out his YouTube channel, where he does things with classic and silent film, and it's a great YouTube channel, and Matt's a great friend, so please subscribe. There'll be a link in the description and a card right around up here and such. If you would like to talk about The Terror, anything you know that I did not list, or anything like that, please comment below in the comments, and subscribe if you would like to. And hopefully The Terror won't be coming after you.